So you're walking through the dungeon, and you got your thief out front. He's poking and prodding. Fighters right behind him, ready to back him up. Cleric, wizard, ranger, they're all kind of pulling up in the back of the party, ready to support from further back. Suddenly there's a click, the walls open, and spikes shoot forward and impale the fighter. Now, it's a pretty severe example, but it is a pretty typical example of a trap in D&D, which is what I want to talk about today. So, welcome back to Elfbait. This is Eli. You'll notice the camera angle's a little different. Still in the garage, but as the holidays are gearing up and we're trying to make room in the rest of the house for the impending Turkpocalypse, we are filling the garage with extra stuff. So, I've got the camera, which is still my beloved phone, facing me from a different direction, but I figured I would steal out here into what space I have and talk traps. So, in the scenario I presented there, clearly the thief failed a trap roll, and the fighter took the brunt of it. There's a couple things to talk about in that little presentation. So first, a couple things. What I want to talk about today is the perception of traps from the player perspective and the DM's perspective. How a DM, which is mostly who these videos are going on to, even though players certainly can enjoy them, should look at traps, and then kind of ways to use traps and trap-like elements in your games for maximum effect, and in a way that won't leave your players chasing you out of the room with a quickly cast summon torches and pitchfork spell. So first thing, perceptions of traps. There's growing discussion across the community in regard to the modern perception, or perception by modern gamers, of traps in gaming. These are pretty staple in classic D&D, back to the Gygaxian days and even up through 2nd and into 3rd editions. But over time, the perception seems to be growing that traps are somehow a big, massively, spring-loaded middle finger to the players. I disagree with this. I think most of that comes from poorly presented and poorly executed traps, or just the over-judicious use of traps. So the it's not really prevailing, but the vocal discussion that's coming out, because the people who are using traps are just using them and they're not really talking much about it, but the outcry against traps is that traps are somehow a lazy DM tool. They are not a true challenge to the party. They are something that is really arbitrary and often leaves little in the way of any kind of creative build-up or execution on the part of the DM. Now, again, used improperly, used poorly, they are exactly that. So that then goes into the next point, which is how to use traps in a way that makes sense, and how they're not going to be seen by players as, a big screw you. So, as a DM, when you're putting in your traps into your dungeon, and by dungeon I mean the broadest sense of dungeon, whether it's the forest or a mountain pass, the middle of a city, a merchant's house, a crypt, whatever it is, ancient temple, current temple, think about why the trap is there, how it is used. So traps for me come in a couple of categories. There is the set and forget, there is the living trap, and then there is the hazard. And hazard is sort of a non-trap trap that I'll talk about at the end, as far as alternatives to traps and ways to use them that aren't necessarily traps. So a set and forget trap is the type of trap for me that you run into in a place that is perhaps primarily set or protected by these traps. A good example would be the temple at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Clearly, these are set and forget traps. They're not traps that are put there along with other guardians. This is not to say that other things haven't moved in and around them, but when you're using set and forget traps, you have to consider a couple of things. How are they maintained? Now, a lot of this can be hand-waved. It is fantasy, so you certainly don't have to bog down too much, but if you're playing in a practical, realistic setting, maybe a low magic, low fantasy setting, you do need to keep in mind, materials degrade over time, tensioned devices lose their tension, water damage, shifting in masonry, mechanical clogs, corrosion. These things will keep set and forget traps from working effectively the longer they're left alone. Now, if the site is being maintained but not manned, then set and forget traps certainly can continue to be useful. But at that point, you also have to consider, if there are set and forget traps, why are there then other creatures in the dungeon? So this becomes sort of a logic sink that you have to go through if you're going to try to present these in a realistic, believable fashion. So if you have set and forget traps, and they're maintained, then whoever's maintaining them either put the monsters there, and then that actually is kind of a cool angle, because then you have monsters that maybe aren't necessarily natural to that environment, but are placed there as part of the overall defense of the dungeon, and that allows you as a DM to get kind of interesting and creative. When somebody runs into piercers in a cave, that makes sense. When somebody runs into bats in a cave, that makes sense. When somebody runs into, a water monster in a room in the middle of a temple that's sealed off from the world, that is a little different. Unless there's a natural water source there, you're going to have a pool that was built. You're going to have maybe some sort of a fountain or something. But your monsters then take on a new role. But this is about traps. So your set and forget traps, they're either maintained, and so therefore the rest of the dungeon has to keep in mind that maintenance, or they are utilizing mechanisms that don't require or rely somehow on systems of energy that are going to degrade over time. Perhaps, as fantasy, you could also write off that these are made through some unknown engineering that we no longer understand. That is reasonable. Use it sparingly, though, because it gets tired real quick. The other possibility is that they're using, and this is easier to do in a typical D&D setting, where they're using minor magic items or minor magical aspects. These set and forget traps are perhaps using an enchanted bowstring that does not break. They are using wood that has been magically treated to where it no longer loses its flexibility and its springiness over time. And so therefore that crossbow trap, while it's not a magical item with a +1 bonus or anything like that, and it hasn't required some massive amount of magic to be used in it, it is kept fresh through magic. Basically, you have flavor saver magic in your dungeon that is keeping the traps from going sour. Now, it could be, if you're going to go that far, you then move into the next type of set and forget trap, and that is traps that are purely magical. Magic runes, magic devices, things that are triggers that set off magical attacks. These are often easy to justify, especially in places like temples or crypts or the rich merchant's home or the castle of the evil overlord. Whatever it is, these guys have got money, and there's often some real serious reason to invest resources in protecting those locations. So set and forget traps. There are then the other traps that you have are, of course, you've got the living trap. Now, the living trap is, excuse me, I had something really bugging me there. Pardon me. It was really rude. You've got living traps in your dungeon that are traps that are designed with creatures or inhabitants in mind. These are traps that are somehow set to stay armed while things are living around them, or are able to be shut off through some sort of access or internal knowledge for the residents of the dungeon. And so living traps can be things as simple as there is a dart trap in this hallway that is deactivated by pulling a lever that's hidden somewhere in the hallway. So now that requires you as the DM to consider these triggers, these locks, these access codes. But this could also be a way to build them into the to take some of the middle finger off of your trap. If your party, especially if your party is made of players who don't particularly care for traps, and you've learned this through playing, and now you can sort of make those traps a little different, so that now they're searching for the candlestick that they can pull the lever on, which disables the spike trap in the hallway. They're looking for the magic rune, which when touched will lock the floor. But this is also a way for your inhabitants of your dungeon to use the traps against the players. Players are pursuing that goblin. The goblin runs down the hallway. They saw the goblin run down the hallway. What they didn't see him do is round the corner, pull the lever on the wall, setting the trap. Now, when the players pursue, they're in pursuit mode and are not likely going to be checking for traps. They hit the trap does damage. Now, in a case of these sorts of traps like this, especially when you're using them as sort of a bait and set, where you're putting the players in a mode where they're not in their usual dungeon caution, I would advise against lethal traps, damaging traps, hindering traps, resource expenditure traps are probably better for this. A net falls on the party. They're now struggling. They have X amount of turns before the goblin guards show up. This is useful. There are darts that fly out. They do damage. Perhaps there's a really low DC sleep toxin on them or something that the players might fall for. One of them may roll badly, but the rest of the party will still stay up. These are good. So living traps are those traps that you might find also in the aforementioned merchant's home, things at city gates, or sally ports. Often castles and cities have back doors that are used in case of siege or when they need to sneak somebody in and out. And you may not necessarily want guards on these places all the time, because that just kind of telegraphs where these ports are. Perhaps your local thieves guild has manholes or sewer grates or something in the village or in the city that they use as entry and exit points from their sewer network to get around the town, and they've got these things booby-trapped. A booby trap is actually not an uncommon form of a living trap. Booby traps are generally set in places where somebody is living, so they know they're there. They maintain them, and often they have ways to get around them. Now, sometimes a living trap is as simple as there is a tripwire, and the people living there know that the tripwire is there. They just know when to step over it. So that's your set and forget and your living traps. Now, in regard to both these things, how can you pull some of the evil off of them and make them less heinous? First of all, depending on where players are going, you can lay out an expectation that there are traps there. You're not telling the players, you're not giving the players a diagram of where the traps are. You are simply letting them know that where they're going is known for traps. Rumor checks, the NPC that they talk to, just general lore about the place. That ancient temple on the hill, yes, it's a site of great evil, and it is known for having the deadliest of traps. Players aren't going to know where the traps are. They still have to search, and they can still fail finding those traps, and they can still stumble on those traps, but at least there's an expectation set ahead. Now, if you don't want to just telegraph them ahead of time as far, or maybe there's not a means by which the players can get that information. If they're exploring that tomb that they found as a side quest and there's not any interaction with an NPC up front and nobody has any lore about it in their skill checks or anything like that, you can still give some notification that there are traps by having things show up earlier in the dungeon that would give hints to this. Bones laying around are good ideas about traps. They could find wild animals that show signs of being poisoned. Maybe they triggered a trap. There's nothing wrong with having the remnants of a sprung trap that is now broken down. There are spikes halfway ejected out of the wall, and hanging from them are the, worm-ridden, or maybe even, depending on how old they are, dried and desiccated remains of a former victim. You don't have to do this with all your traps, but if you do this early in the opening of the dungeon, where it would make sense that these traps have been triggered as folks delved deeper or critters dug in or whatever, then the players know, crap, there's a trap here. So you've now given an expectation that there's traps there, and so the players don't feel that anger and that frustration and that cheat feeling that some people might feel when it's suddenly sprung on them. Now, the other things you can do to take that off when there are traps is, when a trap is triggered, allow an opportunity for it to be avoided. Now, some people will say that this is what a saving throw is, and that is actually what a saving throw really functions as. If it's a spring-loaded dart trap, usually there's a dex save. If it's a gas attack, there's a con save, against the DC of the poison or something. But there are other things you can do to let the players know that a trap is coming. This will allow them to have an action or something that they can do to try and prepare for the trap. A fire trap, for example, when triggered, you might hear a couple of clicking sounds of combustion, or there might be a sudden wash of warm air through the mouth of the gargoyles on either side of the wall. Give that information, and then the players will have an option of what they're going to do. Now, if you're doing this, it doesn't mean that the effect has to be directly related to the trap. The warning sign doesn't have to be directly related to the effect of the trap. But you can do this. You can even actually use this to sort of bait and switch your players too, but you're still giving them a warning. The warm puff of air could be nothing more than a sign that the bellows has started to pump the gas, rather than a precursor to the gouts of fire that are coming out of the mouths of the gargoyles. A clicking and a couple of mechanical ratcheting sounds could be anything from crossbows being cocked to mechanical chompers, or the engagement of a sliding wall trap. The clicking they hear may not, and this is another thing, the clicking that they hear, or the whoosh, or whatever special effect you're using, may not even be directly related to an immediate trap effect. The clicking and the whirring on the floor could be setting up a pit trap 30 feet down the hall. Perhaps that's part of the trap's logic. When the players hear the clicking and they feel that nothing is happening, or they see that nothing happens, there's no immediate effect, they are then lulled into a false sense of security, and they proceed on, only to find out that the floor ahead of them has been trapped, and now they're going to fall into the pit that was there. They can still search, and a player with a lot of guile is likely going to see this for what it is, but he still has to have the check, the attempt to make that that detection. So these are, pre-warning your characters that there are traps, and giving some sort of an effect. My friend Moki likes to call it the click. Whatever it is. I was waiting for the click. He told me when there was a trap. That also reminds me. A good way to help mitigate the insta-kill lethality of spells or of traps is often to have them have a very obvious way to get around them. I had a Warlock's Temple, which is where the click reference comes from, where there is a inscription on the wall that simply says, I think the inscription was, "Speak the truth and you shall not burn." was the inscription, and it was at the doorway to a warlock's tower. And previously, actually, I'd used a few of these tricks because previously the party had seen that there were what looked like guard towers with golden statues with red gem tipped arrows in the sculpture. And the sculptures appeared to be on a pedestal, and there were holes, like loopholes around the towers. And the idea was that these statues would be able to rotate on these things, firing fire bolts out from the bow. It was just a very artistic rendition of a wand of fire bolts, effectively, on a trap. And if they had, and the idea was, you've got a warlock's tower. It's at his door. If you spoke the true intentions for you being there, it would disarm the trap. None of them got it. And then when they got attacked by the firebolt, my player had been waiting for the click. It's like, I was expecting some sort of sign that we'd triggered the trap. I'm like, but this wasn't a mechanical trap, so there wouldn't have been a click. That's the other thing. If you're using special effects, make sure that they are that they match the mechanics of your trap. If you're using magical rune traps and stuff like that, or inscriptions, or just magical zones, force fields, things like that, those are not going to be the sort of things that the thief may even be able to detect, although a thief is likely going to recognize a rune trap. But this is also a time where your wizard and his wonderful arcana skill is going to come in handy, because while the thief may not recognize it, then perhaps the mage can come in and say, well, I'd like to use an arcana check to see if I see any suspicious runes in the hallway. Things that are, and if you ask him to clarify, maybe, is he looking, what is he looking for specifically? Truly, arcane runes are going to be a broad spectrum, but they're likely going to be those that are more commonly associated with traps. Most magic in most universes is done by handed down craft and knowledge, although there is individual research, but even that individual research is often drawn from traditions, and so an arcana skill here might be useful. So, set and forget, living traps, ways to position your traps where they make sense, or ways to telegraph your traps, without giving them away. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is where you place them. A merchant's house is likely going to have traps or magical wards that are going to allow for the apprehension of criminals without making the merchant a criminal himself. Paralysis traps, sleep gas. The other thing is, too, traps don't always have to have a direct effect. Sometimes traps are just an alarm. A merchant in my game had a golden gargoyle over the front of his shop. That shop, or that gargoyle, was effectively a security camera. It watched what was going on in front of the shop and alerted the owner of the shop through a piece of his jewelry if there was somebody trying to break into his shop. They're not likely going to have things that are going to cause fires or damage to their property. After all, they spent a lot of money building their shop, buying their wares. Or if this is the merchant's house, he's a wealthy merchant, he's got a big villa or a manor, it may be protected by magics, but he doesn't want to kill his servants all the time, and he's got guests, and he's got expensive artwork there, and the paneling on his walls comes from 4 kingdoms over, and he doesn't want it to burn up in a fiery conflagration when his fire trap goes off. Similarly, traps that are going to be set in public spaces, and there are reasons why you might do this. You might have a statue of a particular nobleman who is very important to the people in the kingdom. Perhaps that evil overlord has his statues, the statues of his image, trapped to punish those who might transgress against it. Now, likely, because this is a publicly spaced trap, it's not likely going to execute the person right then and there. It's not going to light them on fire. It's not going to fire lightning bolts out into the crowd, because an evil overlord still, most cases, wants to keep his people relatively happy. But it might scream, it might gong, it might alert other people around. It might paralyze the defiler in place. It might mark him in some sort of fairy fire rune, kind of like a magical die pack, that lights him up, so every town guard knows what he has done, and even people in the village will know what he's done. So now he's going to be subject to rats, and snitches all over town. So the appropriateness of your trap is going to be good. If you're in the woods, mechanical traps are not likely going to be there beyond the basis of spring traps and things that use pulleys and things that can be looped over branches, and like pits are a good one in a wooded environment, unless they're coupled with something that is portable. A crossbow trap certainly works in the woods, because you could have a crossbow in a tree, in the crook of a tree, tied to a tripwire. That tripwire fires the bolt, and therefore you have a crossbow trap. If you want ideas for traps in the woods, watch any 80s movie, the Rambo films, any 80s action war movie that takes place in a jungle environment often has tons of them. So where you're placing your traps is super important, and the logic of a trap often goes a long way of helping players deal with any hard feelings they might have about setting off a trap. So the last point I want to touch on is traps that are not traps, and often these are easier to place and easier for folks to deal with, and that is the hazard. A hazard is something that functions very much like a trap, but it is a feature of the environment and not something that was set there to harass the players. Players are in the ancient temple, they're walking across the old stone floor, it looks cracked and parts of it are gone, and they can see that there is a void underneath this. Perhaps the floor has been washed out from underneath by the rains, and so there is a gap, there is a chasm there. They come to the rickety old bridge that spans the great stalagmite-filled cavern that separates the outer temple from the inner temple. That bridge is now worn and old and given to rot. You have a hazard. You're visiting the ancient crypt of the mad sorcerer, and while it was once grand and clearly resplendent with pillars and statues, those pillars have given over to time and decay, and so some of them have started to lean, and the ceiling seems balanced precariously on the remnants of these ancient columns. The city wall, where the players are trying to crawl in, the forgotten part of the town where that they need to try and sneak into. The wall is unguarded, but it is crumbling and may prove hazardous to try and climb. These are things that you can throw in that are going to present a trap-like setting. They're going to force a skill check or some sort of non-combat encounter, and there's going to be damage repercussions for that, or some other repercussion, exhaustion. Climbing a crumbling wall is going to be more tiring than climbing a wall in good condition with good stuff. Dealing with the shale slope that leads up to the cave entrance, where you have to recover the stolen goods from the ogre, it's going to cause exhaustion as they try and climb up. So hazards and environmental conditions can often throw in where a trap might have been used and allow you to have the same break in your combat encounters, which I think is often what a lot of people using traps are wanting to do. They're wanting to present another obstacle to the players that is not a role-playing encounter, but is not combat specifically. So traps fill that role, and another way to do that is through hazards. So, anyways, drawn to the end of the video here, and this was my look at how you can use traps and not incur the ire and hatred of your players. I'd love to hear how other folks are using traps. Do you like traps? Do you not like traps? And if you are using them, throw it in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe. And if you have a trap that you want to use and you want to know if it's a dick move or not, or how to make it better, or ways to surprise your players with some interesting traps, throw the question in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer it there, or maybe I can do another video in the future featuring some ways to do some interesting traps. Anyways, this is Eli from Elfbait. As always, thanks for tuning in and checking me out, and get out and game.